The official narrative of the Exxon Valdez disaster begins on a calm, clear night in Prince William Sound, Alaska. The massive supertanker, laden with 53 million gallons of crude oil, was a behemoth of industry against a backdrop of pristine nature. Just after midnight, on March 24th, 1989, a catastrophic error occurred. The ship, under the command of third mate Gregory Cousins, ran aground on the well-known Bligh Reef. The steel hull was violently torn open, a fatal wound inflicted by the unforgiving reef. Immediately, the vessel began to hemorrhage its toxic cargo into one of the most ecologically sensitive areas on the planet. Exxon's public story quickly focused on the actions of one man, Captain Joseph Hazelwood. He was not on the bridge at the time of the grounding, having retired to his cabin moments before. Reports surfaced that he had been drinking earlier in the day, a fact that became the cornerstone of the corporate defense. This narrative, while containing elements of truth, conveniently shifted the immense weight of blame from the corporation to a single employee. It was a masterstroke of public relations, creating a villain to distract from systemic failures. But the hidden truth began to seep out, much like the oil itself. The Alaska Pipeline Service Company, a consortium including Exxon, was responsible for the initial spill response. Their official contingency plan, a document thick with promises, assured a swift and effective cleanup. This plan guaranteed that equipment would be on site within 5 hours of a spill. Yet, in the critical hours following the grounding, the response was paralyzed by incompetence and unreadiness. A response barge, loaded with essential cleanup equipment, was out of service and undergoing repairs. Containment booms were buried under feet of snow from the winter, inaccessible and useless. Skimmers and other machinery were broken or missing key components. More than 10 hours passed before any meaningful response action was even attempted. During this crucial window, the oil slick grew into a monstrous, unstoppable entity. Exxon Shipping's president, Frank Yarossi, arrived and publicly expressed his shock at the lack of preparedness. His statement seemed to indict Alaska, subtly distancing Exxon from the immediate failure. However, Exxon itself had made decisions that contributed to the disaster long before the ship hit the reef. The company had reduced tanker crew sizes to cut costs, increasing workload and fatigue. They had lobbied against regulations that would have required tankers in Prince William Sound to have double hulls. A double hull, while more expensive, could have significantly reduced or even prevented the spill. Furthermore, the vessel was operating outside of the normal, SAFA shipping lanes. This deviation was to avoid icebergs, but it put the ship on a direct course with Bligh Reef. The failure to return to the shipping lane in time was the final, fatal mistake. As the world watched in horror, Exxon launched a massive public relations campaign. They ran full-page newspaper ads expressing their deep regret and promising to make things right. The company pledged to clean the entire shoreline, a monumental and, as it turned out, impossible task. The cleanup effort itself became a source of further controversy and ecological damage. One of the primary methods used was high-pressure hot water washing. This technique effectively steam cleaned the beaches, giving the appearance of a successful cleanup. However, biologists on the scene were horrified by this approach. The intense heat and pressure cooked the delicate microorganisms that formed the base of the shoreline ecosystem. It killed what little life had survived the initial onslaught of oil. This method was chosen not for its ecological benefit, but for its visual effectiveness for media cameras. It was a photogenic solution that masked a deeper biological devastation. Meanwhile, the oil continued to spread, coating over 13 miles of coastline. The environmental toll was apocalyptic. Hundreds of thousands of seabirds perished, their feathers matted with thick crude. They lost their ability to insulate, dying of hypothermia in the cold Alaskan waters. Thousands of sea otters, beloved for their playful nature, met a gruesome end. The oil destroyed the insulating properties of their dense fur, leading to a painful death. Rescue centers were overwhelmed with dying animals, a grim testament to the spill's lethality. Entire populations of fish, including herring and salmon, were decimated. The herring fishery, a cornerstone of the local economy, collapsed completely and has never fully recovered. This had a devastating impact on the local fishing communities of Prince William Sound. Their livelihoods, built on the bounty of the sea, vanished overnight. The native Alaskan communities, who relied on subsistence hunting and fishing, faced a cultural and economic crisis. The food they had harvested for generations was now poison. Exxon's initial statements downplayed the extent of the damage. They initially reported the spill as being much smaller than it actually was. This misinformation delayed the full-scale federal response, as the true scope was not immediately understood. In the legal battles that followed, Exxon employed a strategy of delay and attrition. Fought the claims of fishermen and residents for years, appealing verdict after verdict. A jury initially awarded $5 billion in punitive damages to the victims, a landmark decision. Exxon's legal team, however, argued the amount was excessive and fought it all the way to the Supreme Court. Nearly 2 decades after the spill, the Supreme Court reduced the punitive damages by 90% to just $507 million. For many of the original plaintiffs, the decision was a final, bitter disappointment. Thousands had died in the intervening years, never seeing a resolution to their claims. The corporate strategy appeared to be to outlive the opposition. Scientific studies also became a battleground in the information war. Independent scientists documented long-term, pervasive damage to the ecosystem. They found that oil had sunk into the beaches, creating toxic reservoirs that would leach out for decades. Exxon, in turn, funded its own studies, which often concluded that the environment was recovering robustly. This created a confusing and contradictory public record, sowing doubt about the true, lasting impact. The cover-up, therefore, was not a single act, but a sustained, multifaceted campaign. It was a cover-up of negligence through the scapegoating of an individual. It was a cover-up of incompetence through the performance of photogenic but destructive cleanup methods. It was a cover-up of responsibility through decades of legal maneuvering. It was a cover-up of ecological truth through the funding of conflicting scientific research. The legacy of the Exxon Valdez is not just the 11 million gallons of spilled oil. It is a story of how corporate power can manipulate narratives and evade true accountability. To this day, pockets of crude oil remain hidden under the rocks of Prince William Sound. It is a sticky, toxic reminder of a disaster that was compounded by a corporate strategy of denial and delay. The ecosystem has not fully recovered, and many species are still struggling. The hidden truth of the Exxon Valdez is that the spill itself was only the beginning of the tragedy. The real disaster was the corporate machine that prioritized its own image and finances over the environment and the lives it had shattered. The initial moments of the crisis were defined by a shocking lack of readiness. Alyeska's own employees later testified that cost-cutting had left their response teams gutted. The company had disbanded its full-time, 24-hour response crew just years earlier. This decision was a gamble, vying the low probability of a spill against the high cost of readiness. It was a gamble that Prince William Sound lost in the most spectacular way imaginable. Exxon's narrative also failed to mention the state of their own shipboard equipment. The vessel's radar system was reportedly not even turned on at the time of the incident. While not required for that specific area, its use could have provided a crucial warning. This detail was conveniently lost in the rush to condemn the captain for his personal failings. Use of chemical dispersants was another chapter in the flawed response. Dispersants are chemicals designed to break up oil into smaller droplets. While this can remove the oil from the surface, it sinks the toxic components into the water column. Initial test applications of the dispersant failed because there was not enough wave action to mix it. Yet, the effort was portrayed to the public as a high-tech, effective solution. This created a false sense of security and progress in the early days of the spill. The human element of the cleanup was a story of both heroism and exploitation. Thousands of people were hired for the grueling work of cleaning beaches by hand. Many were local fishermen who had lost their primary source of income. They were paid by Exxon, creating a complex dynamic of dependency and resentment. Workers reported inadequate safety equipment and exposure to toxic fumes. Many later suffered from chronic respiratory problems and other health issues. The story of the spill became a battle over memory itself. Exxon spent millions on campaigns to restore its public image. They sponsored educational programs and funded community projects. These actions, while seemingly positive, also served to rewrite the history of the disaster. They created a new narrative of corporate responsibility and redemption. This overshadowed the persistent legal battles and the uncompensated losses of the victims. The Oil Pollution Act of 1990 was a direct legislative consequence of the spill. This law mandated double hulls for new tankers and increased penalties for spills. It was a tacit admission that the industry's existing standards were inadequate. However, even this victory was a reminder of the corporate negligence that made it necessary. The cover-up was also evident in the way evidence was handled. Ship logs and records from the night of the grounding were scrutinized. Allegations arose that key documents were altered or had pages mysteriously go missing. This created an environment of suspicion that official records could not be trusted. The third mate, Cousins, had been left in charge with an unlicensed seaman. This was a violation of company policy, another fact obscured by the focus on Hazelwood. The crew was also reportedly smaller than what was standard just a few years prior. Fatigue was a significant, underreported factor in the crew's performance that night. Disaster was a perfect storm of individual error, mechanical failure, and corporate avarice. Blaming only one of these elements is a gross oversimplification. The story Exxon told was simple, clean, and pointed to a single, odd man. The true story was messy, complex, and indicted an entire system. The slick of oil was visible from space, a scar on the face of the earth. The slick of misinformation, however, was invisible but just as pervasive. Wildlife rescue efforts, while valiant, could only save a tiny fraction of the affected animals. For every animal cleaned and saved, hundreds were never found. Long-term genetic damage to fish populations is still being studied today. Herring that spawn in previously oiled areas show higher rates of mutation and disease. This demonstrates that the poison of the spill is still active in the ecosystem. The orca whale population of the Sound also suffered greatly. One transient pod that lived in the area lost a significant number of its members in the years following the spill. That pod is now considered functionally extinct, a direct casualty of the disaster. Exxon's carefully crafted story had no room for the death of a whale family. It focused on clean beaches and financial compensation, tangible things that could be photographed and quantified. The intangible losses of culture, of trust, of pristine wilderness were written out of the official history. The spill was a wake-up call, But the corporate response was a lesson in damage control. It demonstrated that for a powerful enough entity, the truth can be just another variable to be managed. The black tide that swept through Prince William Sound was more than just oil. It was a tide of negligence, deceit, and a profound disregard for the natural world.